Now it's time to talk about the bosses of Elden Ring. This is probably the most controversial part of the game, and it's probably going to be the most negative part of this critique. Don't get me wrong, Elden Ring has some really great bosses, but there are a lot of really bad bosses as well as of course the multitude of reused bosses. And the reused bosses is where we're going to start, and then we'll get to the bosses that I think are good and the ones that I think are bad. I'm going to be talking about almost all of the bosses in the game individually, so I guess we'll just get into it. The first one I want to talk about is the Tree Sentinel. Outside of the tutorial, it's the first boss the player will see, and it's honestly a great boss, and it leaves a lasting impression as well. The attacks are all well designed and telegraphed, and it just feels good to fight. Although one of the AoE ground slam attacks is particularly difficult and awkward to dodge, and sometimes it feels like you should have dodged it but didn't. But besides that one flaw, it's a great boss. It's nice when you're returning on another playthrough to fight him right away and warm up, and it also teaches new players to go do something else if something's too difficult at the moment. Another boss that players will find quite early in the game is the Erdtree Avatar, and this one I don't have as many positive things to say about. It is quite similar to the Asylum Demon, which was reused in Dark Souls 3, although that version was quite different. As a boss, it's not super offensive, it's a decent boss, but the bad part is the reuse of it. The Erdtree Avatar is used over a dozen times in the game if I'm not mistaken, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this is going to be a recurring theme for this part as I'll get used to it. The boss itself isn't bad, but the reuse is honestly really bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For a boss to be used that many times is just not good. I guess it's fine to have one at the minor Erdtrees, but it keeps showing up in other places like Leyndell and Elphael, and in both of those cases the arenas are far too tight to fight them. I also forgot to mention the reuse of the Tree Sentinel. While it's not reused nearly as many times, the Tree Sentinel's reuse is really bad as well because of the duo boss. There are two Tree Sentinels outside Leyndell. Fighting them both is an absolutely miserable experience, however there is a way to fight them one-on-one. It just takes a little bit of time, which can be annoying, especially if you die. And this wouldn't even be an issue if there was just one. And now that I mention it, there is actually a duo boss of the Erdtree Avatar, which is just terrible. The Knight's Cavalry is very similar to the Tree Sentinel in terms of the actual boss fight, but the Knight's Cavalry can be knocked off its horse, which is interesting. It's a decent fight, and especially with it only appearing at night, it could have been pretty good if it wasn't reused 9 times. Sticking with bosses that can be found early on, the Erdtree Burial Watchdog is, again, not a terrible boss, albeit not a great one, but the reuse fit is what ruins it. The boss is reused multiple times across different catacombs, and while that would be annoying on its own, it often involves other enemies around it, which is just obnoxious. There's versions where you have to fight skeletons with it, and there's even a duo version. The Tibia Mariner is a similar story. It's actually a pretty interesting boss the first time you fight it. It's not the most challenging, but it's not lazy. But again, the reusage ruins it. The Magma Worm is another boss that is actually really excellent the first time you fight it, if you fight Makar first. Magma Worm Makar is a really good boss. The attacks are well done, the lava makes you have to position yourself well, and the arena is really good for the boss. But of course it has to be reused on multiple occasions, and the reused versions do not have arenas that play well with the boss. Another good boss that gets reused as a normal enemy and also ruins the fight is the Crystallian. The first Crystallian, the one that you'll find in the Liurnia mine, is actually a great boss. The gimmick is interesting and it teaches players to use heavy attacks, and the reward is also excellent. It's honestly a really good boss, but you can probably guess what happens next. The Gargoyles are another boss that I think is notable enough to talk about. At least for the Blackblade Kindred, some of their AoEs are incredibly difficult to dodge. They do deal really high damage as well on the whole, although they do appear in somewhat late game areas. It still can be a little bit much, but that's part of the whole late game difficulty spike, not just this boss. For the stone ones in the Valiant Gargoyle duo boss, of course the actual boss is a mess, but why can they release poison? The attack itself is annoying to deal with, especially because of how hard it can be to see, but it also just doesn't make sense for a stone gargoyle to be able to release poison, unless maybe I guess it has it stored inside, I don't know. The Valiant Gargoyles are also used multiple times across the world, as are the Blackblade Kindreds. But it's not just field bosses that get reused. Some major bosses get reused as well. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Red Wolf of Radagon, because it's the least important boss, and its reuse is the least offensive. Firstly, this boss was reused from Dark Souls 3's Ashes of Ariandel DLC, except for its new magic attacks. That kind of sucks, but I guess it's not too big of a deal, except the boss gets reused multiple times, which is, not great. Godfrey, one of the best bosses in the game, also gets reused. Only once, but it still is kind of annoying for the first phase of a boss, just to be put in a random area with no explanation to pad out the game. And finally, the worst of all is Godric, or in this case, his evil twin Godfroy. Just saying that sounds like satire. It honestly sounds made up, and it's actually pretty funny just because of how stupid it is. Godric is a great boss, but of course they had to reuse him in an Everjail and call him Godfroy. I mean, I don't even know what to say, that's actually ridiculous. But that's all I wanted to talk about for the reused bosses. Those are all the ones I wanted to mention, and there's still some I didn't talk about, like the Bloodhound Knight and the Flower Boss, which both get reused as normal enemies. And this just makes me think about how bosses used to be a big deal. Bosses in Elden Ring don't even really feel like bosses like they used to, at least most of them, because the vast majority of them are reused field bosses. Bosses used to be exciting and challenging for the most part. There were some bad ones, but overall they felt like exciting tests of skill and ways to cap off a level. In Elden Ring, they're just there to fill the world, and every once in a while give a challenge or a decent reward. It honestly sucks, and it makes you wonder if it would have been better to just not give them boss health bars. But it's not all bad, because now it's time to talk about the actually good bosses. There's still a good amount of bosses that are actually really great, and for the Remembrance bosses, most of them are actually pretty good. First we have Godric. I just talked about him, and like I said, this is an excellent boss fight. The presentation and visuals are really well done, and the voice acting is really good too. On a mechanical level, his attacks feel good to fight against and dodge, and they feel fair and they're well telegraphed. It's just a great boss overall, but of course, Godfroy has to exist. The Mimic tier is a simple boss, but it's actually quite interesting. The gimmick is pretty interesting to fight against, and it can be pretty rewarding to figure out to unequip all your weapons to make it super easy. It is reused, but by the time you fight it again, your build will have evolved a lot, if not drastically changed. The Ancestor Spirit is a boss that isn't the most challenging, but it's still a great experience. The visuals and music are brilliant, and it feels good to fight against. It is reused once, but it's used in the same type of area, which helps it feel unique to the underground regions, although it can be tedious to light the fires again, and it kind of sucks for there to be two of them. Estelle is another great boss that gets reused. It would have been super cool because of how unique of a boss it is, and especially because it caps off Ronnie's questline, but unfortunately it had to be reused. A boss that doesn't get reused, at least not really, and definitely not mechanically, is Radahn, and it only gets reused in the DLC, which will get its own video. But Radahn is a really great boss. The whole festival and summoning a bunch of allies to fight him feels exciting and epic. His attacks were also designed to be able to fight multiple people at once, which makes it more fair and not feel like you're cheesing him when you summon a bunch of allies. Loretta is a boss that is honestly really great. I think this boss is a little underrated because there's really nothing bad about it. The attacks are all good, and it's really just a solid boss. It is reused once, but it makes sense for her to be in that area, and plus it's nice to fight the boss again, especially in this beautiful arena. I know we're not talking about the reused bosses anymore, but I still keep mentioning the reuse of the bosses in this game, which just goes to show how prevalent it is and how bad it is for it to even happen in major bosses. Margit is the first major boss players will likely find, and I think he does a good job of not only letting players know they should explore more, but also teaching them how bosses in Elden Ring work and what they need to be able to do to beat them. Margit pretty much has everything that later bosses have, and it teaches players to be able to deal with different types of attacks. And most of the attacks are fine enough, although the input reading on the sword throws and the many delayed attacks he has can be quite annoying. But besides that, I think it's a pretty good boss. Morgott is pretty similar to Margit as a boss, but his presentation is of course more exciting and epic, and his boss fight is probably more fun. Morgott is actually a really great boss, and a great way to end this part of the game, before of course the huge difficulty spike. I think it's a pretty fun fight, but it does have the same input reading, which can be annoying when you want to heal. Godfrey is the second to last boss in the game, and I think it's a really good boss, at least for the first phase. It's really just an excellent boss with a great moveset that feels fair. All the attacks feel good to dodge, and I really have no complaints about this phase. The second phase I can't speak as highly of. His attacks can be annoying to dodge, and the delays are just ridiculous. There's also not a lot of opportunities to get hits in, but I guess that's not a huge deal. It just doesn't feel as good and as smooth as the first phase does. Melania is quite a controversial boss. Some people think she's terrible, some people think she's great, and I would be on the latter side. I think Melania is a great boss. I know waterfowl dance is a thing, but I honestly don't think it's that bad. In the first phase, you can pretty much predict when she's gonna do it. It does kind of suck that you have to back off from her though, or I guess you could just try your luck at dodging it up close, because it is not impossible. In the second phase, I didn't think waterfowl dance was that bad, but maybe that's just me. And besides waterfowl dance, all the other attacks feel great, and it just feels really good to fight this boss. Lich Dragon Fortisax is a really great dragon boss, and I would say it's quite underrated. For one thing, the arena and soundtrack are amazing. The presentation and the build up to this boss is really cool. It feels exciting, and the spectacle is pretty great as well. For the moveset, it is similar to the other ancient dragons of the game, but there are some unique attacks that are pretty cool. It feels pretty good to fight, and I'd say it's a really good boss. Mohg is another amazing boss. This is one of my favorite fights of the game. The moveset feels really great to fight, and it feels fair. The music is also really good too. I personally think this is one of the best fights in the game, and I think it's a really great boss overall in the series. Malakath is another boss that I think is good, but I wouldn't regard it as highly as Mohg. The first phase is decent enough, but I think the second phase is better. I think phase 1 is decent to fight against, but phase 2 feels pretty good, although the destined death effect can be a little too punishing. Once again, it also feels like a really epic fight. I think it's a pretty good fight overall. The Grafted Scion is the tutorial boss, and as a boss, I think it's pretty good. It's very difficult for the tutorial if you're not using Square Off. You're obviously not supposed to win, but I feel like it's a little too difficult for the tutorial, considering the reward you get isn't that great. And if you do beat it, all that happens afterward is you walk over to the end of the cliff, and it falls and you die, which is super lazy. The Draconic Tree Sentinel is next, and this is where we start to get to the bad bosses. I don't think the Draconic Tree Sentinel is that bad, but there are some things that I don't really like about it. For one thing, the input reading on the fireballs are super annoying, and even besides that, it just spams them. Also in the second phase, some of the AoEs are a little silly. There's one big one where he winds up for a long time, and for that one I think the only thing you can do is run away, because it's very difficult to dodge up close. but besides it being a little annoying at times, I don't think it's a bad fight. Sir Gideon Ofnir is a different story. Gideon actually sucks. This boss is actually so goddamn annoying because of how much he spams. And the thing is, he can either be super easy and you could beat him on your first try, or he'll be incredibly difficult and take you forever. But yeah, he sucks. I hate him. He's a terrible boss. The Fire Giant is the first major boss after the big difficulty spike of the game, and it definitely shows with how much damage he can do in the second phase. In phase 2, he can one-shot you if you aren't careful, and that never feels good. Besides that, actually fighting the boss isn't terrible, it's just tedious and maybe a little awkward. He does have quite a large amount of health, which could be expected, but if you're well upgraded, it shouldn't be too bad. The first phase is fine, but the second phase can drag on for quite a while. Another thing is that the arena has unnecessary obstacles that you can get stuck on, which is just annoying. The presentation is pretty cool though. Rykard is a fight that I think is incredibly overrated. It definitely deserves some of the praise it gets, specifically in the presentation and aesthetics of it, which are great, as well as the Storm Ruler weapon being much more expanded on compared to Dark Souls 3 and Demon Souls, with it having a much bigger moveset. But actually fighting the boss can be quite frustrating. For one thing, it does lots of damage and has huge attacks, which can be incredibly difficult to dodge, particularly the ground attack. Phase 2 is visually cluttered and it can be very difficult to tell what is happening sometimes. And of course, the skull attack is awful. I think it's just as bad as Elden Stars, and it is actually quite similar. The skulls follow you and explode on impact, all while the boss is attacking you, and it goes on for a long time as well. While the boss looks great and on paper is an epic fight, actually fighting it is not super fun. Commander Nile is the boss that you have to fight to get the second half of the Haligtree Medallion, and it's not a great fight. The only major issue is the summons. While they are bad, they are pretty easy to take down in the beginning of the fight. While they're being summoned, you can easily kill one of them, and they don't have that much health. So if you can avoid the commander, the other ones should be pretty easy to kill, especially because the knight will chase you down relentlessly, while the commander just slowly walks. The actual fight is decent. The Godskin duo is of course very infamous. Everyone knows how bad this boss is. The two bosses do not play well together, and the thought of fighting the two of them together is actually ridiculous. Although actually fighting the boss is not that bad. There's an opportunity in the beginning of the fight as they're spawning in to do quite a bit of damage to one of them, then just use the pillars to block the other one so you can finish him off. From there it's not bad at all, and you only occasionally have to fight both together. And while one summons the other, they're open to a lot of damage. So yeah, of course the fight is terrible, but if I'm being honest, I don't think fighting it is too bad. Renala is quite underwhelming. Sorcerer fights usually aren't great, but this one is particularly bad. The first phase is just tedious, and the second phase is actually pretty good, except for the summoning. And it sucks because without that, the fight would have been pretty good. But the summoning ruins it. Especially with how good the arena looks, this fight could have been really good. So it's unfortunate that one simple thing has to ruin it. The final boss, or final bosses, are a mixed bag. Radagon is a pretty good boss, although to be honest, he does seem a little basic for the final boss, but the music is really cool. His character was hyped up a lot through the game. Even if you weren't paying attention to the story, you've probably heard some things about him up to this point. But he ends up being pretty basic and easy, although it isn't a bad boss at all. The Elden Beast, on the other hand, sucks. I have to say though that the visuals and music are amazing, but it's just frustrating for it to move so far away and so fast. Torrent does make it a good bit better, but it's still not a great fight. Elden Stars is awful, even with Torrent. It's a shame for Elden Ring's final boss to be lackluster, when there are so many excellent final bosses in this series. In summary, Elden Ring's bosses are mixed overall. There are some overall issues in the boss roster, like the overtuned tracking on some attacks, delayed attacks, and input reading, although I personally don't find them to be too bad. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet is the amount of damage dealt and damage taken. In some bosses in this game, it kind of feels like you take way too much damage, but you also deal too much damage. In older Souls games, bosses didn't take much damage, but their attacks didn't do crazy amounts of damage either. But some Elden Ring bosses don't really feel like that, which I don't really like. And again, bosses used to feel important, whereas now there are so many reused field bosses and just straight up lazy bosses that they don't really have that feeling like they used to of being a big deal. But of course there is still a lot of good in Elden Ring's bosses. It really is a mixed bag with some good things and some bad things.